You're watching The Legal Breakdown. Glenn, all eyes have been on one trial in particular where 14 different states have sued the federal government, Elon Musk, Donald Trump, and Doge from being able to access a wealth of our private information from the Treasury. We now have an update as far as that case is concerned. It is sitting right now in front of Judge Chutkan. Can you explain what just happened in court?
Yeah, Judge Chutkan just denied the request of the 14 states for what's called a TRO, a temporary restraining order, and said, you know, the states have not made an adequate showing, and here is the language that applies to a request for a temporary restraining order. There has to be clear evidence of immediate, irreparable harm. And Judge Chutkan said, this is my translation, man, there's a lot of potentially cruddy stuff going on inside these federal agencies that Musk and his team are accessing. However, I don't have evidence. You haven't presented me evidence of immediate, irreparable harm. But let me do this, Brian, because I don't want to misquote or mischaracterize exactly what Judge Chutkan did say, because she's a judge who I think is universally well-respected and highly regarded. So here is a little bit of what she said. She said the plaintiffs, meaning the 14 states, legitimately call into question what appears to be the unchecked authority of an unelected individual and an entity that was not created by Congress and over which Congress, has no oversight. In these circumstances, it must be indisputable that this court acts within the bounds of its authority, Chutkan said. Accordingly, I can't issue a TRO, especially one as wide-ranging as the plaintiffs, the states, request without clear evidence of imminent, irreparable harm to these plaintiffs. And the current record does not meet that standard. It's a bit of a catch-22 that the judge, the court, finds itself in, because when Musk and Doge and all his little frat bros are in there, with their keystrokes and their grubby little paws going through our personal data, we don't know. Those 14 states don't know what's being done in there. But what Judge Chutkan concluded is, listen, there's an exacting standard in the law. I understand you don't know what's going on, but I have to be presented with, quote, clear evidence of immediate, irreparable harm. And I'm not seeing it yet based on this stage of the proceedings.
And so that's what I want to dig into a little bit here, because the whole point of being able to stop these people is that the whole process is so opaque. We don't know what's going on. And so the inspectors general have been fired. The career civil servants are being gutted from these agencies. And so do we just have to wait really for the worst to happen before we can actually do something about it, as opposed to being able to take preventative measure from the worst being able to happen by virtue of the fact that we have no insight into this stuff?
Yeah, it feels wrong, doesn't it? Because it feels like there's a lot of harm being done by Musk and company in lots of different ways.
It's like this. Let me put it into let me put it in use this analogy. It's like a bank robber broke into a bank, but we can't do anything about it until we see how much they walk out with.
That is a compelling analogy, but once the bank robber breaks into the bank, the crime has been consummated, whether the bank robber gets any money from the bank or not.
That's where the disconnect in my brain comes, because these folks who shouldn't have access to any of this stuff are in there. We don't know what they could be doing, and so why do we have to wait until the crime has been the crime has been perpetuated before trying to prevent a crime from taking place?
But here's the thing, Brian. When the bank robber goes into the bank intending to commit an offense therein, that is at a minimum an attempted bank robbery. But here's where I will kind of tweak the analogy a little bit. Donald Trump gave these mofos, that's a legal term, permission to go into the dang bank wearing a mask and with a gun in their hand and holding a big burlap sack with a cartoon dollar sign on it, with the getaway vehicle waiting outside. But because Donald Trump gave them all permission, and because there is no clear evidence of immediate irreparable harm, even though it might be in progress, the reality is Judge Chutkan had to apply the law as it was designed to be applied. A TRO, a temporary restraining order, is something that can actually, in emergency circumstances, be put in place without the other party even being heard if the evidence is that clear that there's irreparable injury that is taking place, that can be proved to the court's satisfaction. But here's the good news. There's not a lot of good news surrounding this story, but there's a little bit. This request for a TRO is just the opening skirmish. And what Judge Chutkan said is, listen, there is something else that can be done. It's called a preliminary injunction. A TRO is issued for a very short period of time. A preliminary injunction can be issued for the life of the case. It can actually freeze the status quo right here, right now, until this case is litigated to fruition, months and months down the road. So she said, listen, I will give you 14 states, the plaintiffs, until 5 p.m. on Wednesday to file a request for a preliminary injunction. We'll be back in court. We'll see what the status of the evidence is then, and we will continue to litigate this issue.
All right. Well, Glenn, clearly the parties are going to continue litigating this thing. How are we going to have any forward movement, whether it's by virtue of a TRO or an injunction, if they're not able to show any harm because we're still in a position where we don't know what these kids are doing inside of the Treasury?
Yeah, I think the optimistic view of this is more harm is being done by the day. More harm is being and will be exposed by the day, and that will help the states build the record that, you know what, we really do have clear evidence of immediate irreparable harm that has developed over the last few days. Now, unfortunately, we, the American people, are all running the risk of being victimized by having our personal information compromised. But, sometimes, the law does not make a lot of sense. Sometimes the law seems to have to take a back seat and await the harm. I mean, think about it. When you're prosecuting crimes, the crime has to be committed. The harm is done before an investigation happens and charges are potentially brought. This is a civil case, so it's a little bit different, but the principles are largely the same. Listen, you have to meet the standards of the law if the judge is going to order somebody to stop doing what they're doing. So listen, there's another bite at the apple coming tomorrow and probably even beyond tomorrow for the 14 states and by extension for we, the American people, who feel like we're having folk rummaging through our personal data who have no business, no legitimate business rummaging through our personal data.
Look, we try to be fair and not just cover the good news, of which there isn't much these days, but to cover good court rulings or decisions and bad court decisions. This is obviously one that didn't go our way. But I want to ask you, in all fairness here, trying to be as objective as possible, if you would agree with the decision that Judge Chutkan handed down here.
I can only say that because I know Judge Chutkan well, I used to try murder cases against her when she was a public defender and I was a homicide prosecutor in the courts of Washington, D.C. I have the utmost respect for her integrity, for her intellect, and for her aggressiveness on the rule of law front. I wasn't sitting in there watching, every single argument that was made by the 14 states, the plaintiffs. But, I have enough trust in her judgment and her track record, particularly presiding over the Donald Trump January 6th case, that I trust her decisions. Now, I would need to be in there and actually read all the documents and hear the arguments to make a more informed decision. But, I am clearly going to give Judge Chutkan the benefit of the doubt as being an honest, ethical, smart, and aggressive judge.
Yeah, I think that's the correct take. Glenn, I would ask now, what are we looking forward to happening Wednesday at 5 o'clock?
I think we're going to see a new court filing. And I think the 14 states, the plaintiffs will probably try to mine for evidence everybody and anybody they can. Listen, there are a lot of aggrieved people in these federal agencies, some of whom were gratuitously fired, if not wrongfully terminated. Some of them are still there, and they are seeing these abuses go on in real time. Some are very likely talking to their own elected representatives, saying, let me tell you what he is doing inside these government agencies that is damaging, deeply damaging and deeply troubling. So listen, this investigation, I'm sure, is moving at light speed from the perspective of the states who brought this request for injunctive relief. And so we may see even more evidence fleshed out in tomorrow's 5 p.m. filing.
All right, well, we will, of course, stay on top of this issue. For folks who are watching right now, if you want to follow along, please make sure to subscribe. That is the best way to support our work. The links to both of our channels are right here on this screen. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.